"Lock every gate," King Rowan Ashford said, his voice carrying across the grand hall before anyone dared to speak. "No one leaves Blackstone Keep until I find the owner of that scent." Silence swallowed the room. Hundreds of alphas, betas, and omegas stood beneath the vaulted ceiling, their eyes drifting from one royal guard to another. Rowan rarely raised his voice. He never gave an order without reason. If he had sealed the capital in the middle of the annual summit of Pax, something had gone terribly wrong. Rowan stood at the top of the marble staircase, dressed in a charcoal suit beneath the ceremonial cloak reserved for the Alpha King. The silver crest of Ashmore rested over his heart, a reminder that every decision he made belonged to the kingdom before it belonged to himself. Yet tonight, duty wasn't what tightened his chest. It was a scent. It had appeared only for a heartbeat. Clean rain, white cedar, wild lavender after a summer storm. Impossible. His wolf stirred for the first time in years, restless beneath carefully controlled instincts. Not anger. Something else. Something older than memory. Rowan closed his eyes for a single breath before opening them again. "Search every corridor," he ordered. Quietly. No panic. His beta commander hesitated. "Your Majesty, what exactly are we looking for?" Rowan's jaw tightened. Someone who was never supposed to be here. Across the courtyard, hidden beyond the noise of arriving delegates and television crews covering the historic summit, Evelyn Hart adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel. She kept her head down as she crossed toward the Royal Medical Wing, blending into the steady stream of suppliers and volunteers. To everyone else, she looked ordinary. A traveling herbalist delivering medicine before sunrise. No noble family. No pack insignia. No reason to be noticed. Exactly the way she wanted it. She slipped inside a quiet storage room and locked the door behind her. From her bag, she removed a small glass bottle filled with amber-colored liquid and poured several drops into a steaming mug. The familiar scent of mountain herbs filled the room. Her grandmother had taught her the recipe years ago with one warning she had never forgotten. Never miss a dose. Never let them smell who you really are. Evelyn wrapped both hands around the warm mug until her breathing slowed. Outside, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Royal guards. More than usual. She frowned. Something had changed. She couldn't know that less than 5 minutes earlier, a gust of evening wind had carried away the protection her herbs normally provided. Just long enough. Just far enough. Long enough for the Alpha King to notice. Rowan walked through the crowded corridors himself, instead of waiting for reports. Delegates greeted him respectfully, but he barely heard them. His instincts pulled him in a direction his mind couldn't explain. Every few steps, the invisible trail disappeared, then returned like a fading melody. His wolf refused to settle. He stopped beside an open courtyard overlooking the gardens. The breeze shifted again. There it was. Faint. Fragile. Real. Before he could move, it vanished. Rowan stared into the darkness beyond the stone arches. "You've been hiding for a long time," he murmured to no one. "But you're here." At that exact moment, Evelyn stepped back into the hallway carrying her crate of medicine. A young noblewoman glanced at her plain clothes and scoffed loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Watch where you're going," she snapped. "Service entrances exist for people like you." Several guests chuckled before continuing toward the banquet hall. Evelyn lowered her eyes and quietly stepped aside. She had learned years ago that drawing attention only invited questions she could never answer. She didn't see Rowan standing at the opposite end of the corridor. But for one impossible second, their eyes met across the crowded hall, and neither of them understood why the entire world suddenly felt different. The banquet hall filled with polite conversation, crystal glasses, and carefully rehearsed smiles. But Evelyn Hart stayed close to the edges of the room, where people rarely looked twice at someone carrying a wooden crate instead of wearing a jeweled gown. She delivered jars of herbal salve and fresh bandages to the royal physicians, signed her name in a weathered ledger, and quietly prepared to leave before the evening's ceremonies began. That had always been her rule. Arrive unnoticed. Leave forgotten. It had kept her safe for years. "You are early," an older physician said as he accepted the supplies. "That is unusual during summit week." Evelyn smiled softly. "Less traffic before sunrise tomorrow. I thought it would help." The physician nodded with genuine appreciation. "The patients always ask if the medicine came from Miss Hart. They say yours actually works." She laughed under her breath. "Herbs only do part of the job. People heal because they want to. As she turned toward the door, a sudden burst of excited voices echoed through the corridor. Several young wolf pups, children from visiting packs, had slipped away from their families and were racing through the palace halls. Royal guards hurried after them, trying to remain professional despite the chaos. One little boy stumbled on the polished stone floor, dropping the carved wooden wolf he had been carrying. Before anyone else reacted, Evelyn knelt beside him. "Easy there," she said gently. "No broken bones?" The boy shook his head, embarrassed. She dusted off his sleeve and handed him the small wooden figure. "There you go." Instead of running away, the child stared at her with wide eyes. "Your hands smell like the forest after rain," he whispered. His older sister quickly grabbed his arm. "Come on." Mom said not to bother strangers. They disappeared around the corner before Evelyn could answer, leaving her with an uneasy feeling she could not explain. At the far end of the hallway, Rowan had witnessed the entire exchange. He had not heard the boy's words, but he had seen something else. The palace wolf assigned to guard the medical wing, an enormous gray male known for distrusting nearly everyone outside the royal family, calmly walked toward Evelyn and sat beside her without a sound. The guards froze. "What is Cedar doing?" one whispered. "He never approaches strangers." Rowan watched carefully as Evelyn looked just as surprised as everyone else. She slowly extended her hand. Cedar lowered his head, accepting the quiet gesture before returning to his post as though nothing unusual had happened. Rowan felt that same restless pull inside his chest. It was becoming harder to ignore. "Who is she?" he asked. His beta commander checked a list. Evelyn Hart, independent herbalist. No registered pack affiliation. She has supplied the royal clinic for almost 3 years. "No pack," Rowan repeated. "That is what the records say." Rowan frowned. In his experience, records often hid more than they revealed. Across the courtyard, Evelyn finally stepped outside, hoping the cool night air would settle her nerves. She reached into her satchel for the small bottle of herbal mixture she always carried. Only a few drops remained. She tipped it upside down. Nothing. Her heart sank. She searched every pocket twice before accepting the truth. Somewhere between the clinic and the hallway, she had lost the last of the medicine that protected her secret. She looked toward the distant lights of Blackstone Keep, unaware that someone else was already searching for the mystery she had spent her entire adult life trying to hide. The next morning, Blackstone Keep woke beneath a blanket of low clouds that turned the castle walls the color of steel. Delegates from every major pack gathered in the eastern courtyard for the opening ceremony, their banners moving gently in the cool breeze. Evelyn preferred to avoid crowds whenever she could, but the royal clinic needed fresh supplies from the market square inside the castle grounds. She adjusted the strap of her satchel and reminded herself of the same promise she had repeated every day for years. "Finish the delivery. Keep your head down. Leave before sunset." She had almost reached the clinic when a familiar voice called after her. "Miss Hart." She turned to find the elderly physician smiling as he hurried toward her. "I have another favor to ask. The infirmary is short on willow bark and fever root. Could you gather more before noon?" Evelyn accepted the handwritten list with a grateful nod. "Of course. I can have everything back within an hour." "You are saving us again," the physician said with a warm laugh. "I hope they finally pay you what you deserve." Evelyn smiled politely. Helping people is enough. She meant it, although part of her wished life could be that simple. As she crossed the marketplace, merchants greeted nobles with exaggerated enthusiasm while barely noticing the quiet herbalist moving between the stalls. She liked it that way. Being invisible had become a kind of protection. Not far away, Rowan stood on the balcony outside the council chamber, listening to updates from his advisors without truly hearing them. Trade agreements, border patrols, security concerns. Every report sounded distant. His attention kept drifting toward the marketplace below. His beta commander noticed. "You are distracted today," Rowan answered honestly. "Something feels different." The summit always brings tension. Rowan slowly shook his head. Not tension. He rested one hand against the cold stone railing. Recognition. Before his commander could respond, Rowan caught sight of Evelyn weaving through the crowd with a basket of herbs balanced against her hip. She moved with quiet confidence, stopping to help an elderly vendor lift a heavy crate before continuing on her way. Nothing about her demanded attention, Yet somehow every instinct Rowan possessed followed her without permission. That is the herbalist again, his commander observed. Yes. Rowan did not look away. Arrange a meeting. Officially, Rowan considered the question. No. If there is something unusual about her, I want to discover it without frightening her. Minutes later, Evelyn entered a narrow garden path connecting the market to the clinic. It was the fastest route, and usually empty during council sessions. She knelt beside a flower bed to collect fresh lavender with permission from the royal gardeners when footsteps approached behind her. She stood immediately. Rowan Ashford stopped several feet away, leaving enough distance that she would not feel cornered. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable. Miss Hart, she inclined her head respectfully. Your Majesty, the physicians speak highly of your work. They are kind people. Rowan glanced at the bundle of herbs in her hands. You seem to know this castle well. Only the gardens and the clinic. A quiet moment settled between them. Evelyn could feel his eyes studying her, not with suspicion, but with careful curiosity. It made her more nervous than open accusation would have. Rowan finally spoke again. Have we met before? The question caught her completely off guard. No, Your Majesty. I do not believe so. He nodded once, although something in his expression suggested he was not convinced. A breeze drifted through the garden, carrying the faint scent of cedar and fresh rain between them. Rowan felt his wolf stir again, stronger than before, while Evelyn's heart skipped for reasons she could not explain. She instinctively stepped backward. In that small movement, the strap of her satchel slipped from her shoulder. A folded piece of aged parchment fell onto the stone path. Before she could reach it, Rowan bent down and picked it up. His eyes settled on the faded symbol pressed into the old paper. It was a silver crescent surrounding an ancient ash tree, a crest that had disappeared from every royal record more than 15 years earlier. Rowan turned the brittle parchment over in his hand, without taking his eyes off the faded crest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The garden around them seemed unusually quiet, as though even the birds had paused to listen. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She reached out carefully. That belonged to my grandmother, she said. May I have it back? Rowan looked up. There was no accusation in his expression, only thoughtful curiosity. Where did she find this? Evelyn hesitated. The answer she had repeated all her life came automatically. It was just an old family keepsake. Rowan studied her face for another second before handing the parchment back. Most keepsakes do not carry the seal of a forgotten royal bloodline. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. She forced herself to remain calm as she slipped the parchment safely into her satchel. I would not know anything about that, Your Majesty. Rowan did not press her. Perhaps not. His voice stayed even. But if anyone asks about this conversation, tell them we discussed herbs. Nothing more. The unexpected kindness caught her off guard. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed through the garden entrance. Beta Regent Magnus Blackthorne entered with 2 council escorts at his side. His tailored navy coat and polished smile projected confidence, but his sharp gray eyes missed very little. Your Majesty, Magnus said smoothly. The council is waiting. His gaze shifted toward Evelyn for only a heartbeat before returning to Rowan. Am I interrupting? We were finished, Rowan replied. Evelyn lowered her head respectfully and walked toward the clinic without looking back, though she could feel Magnus watching her until she disappeared around the corner. The moment she was gone, Magnus folded his hands behind his back. Interesting choice of company. Rowan answered without emotion. She supplies medicine to the royal clinic. So I have heard. Magnus smiled faintly. Sometimes ordinary people carry extraordinary problems. Rowan met his eyes. Do you know her? No. Magnus answered a little too quickly. Should I? Rowan said nothing. Silence had become one of his strongest tools as king. People often revealed more when they rushed to fill it. Magnus simply inclined his head and changed the subject, but Rowan noticed the brief tension around his eyes. Across the castle grounds, Evelyn hurried into the clinic storage room and closed the door behind her. Her hands trembled as she placed the satchel on the table. She carefully unfolded the old parchment. The silver crest had faded with age, but one sentence remained visible beneath the symbol in elegant handwriting. Protect the last daughter until the ash tree blooms again. She had read those words hundreds of times, yet today they felt heavier. Her grandmother had refused to explain them before she died. She had only made Evelyn promise 3 things. Never reveal the crest. Never trust anyone who seeks the old bloodlines. Never let an alpha king discover who you are. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Hart called the elderly physician from outside. We need your help. Evelyn quickly tucked the parchment away and opened the door. Inside the treatment room, a teenage courier from a northern pack sat pale and exhausted after collapsing from a severe fever during his journey. The royal healers had already tried several remedies without success. Can you think of anything? The physician asked quietly. Evelyn knelt beside the young man and gently checked his pulse. Bring me fresh mint, elderflower, and cold spring water, she said. No more fever tonic. It is making him weaker. The physician trusted her without question. Within minutes, Evelyn mixed a simple herbal infusion and encouraged the boy to drink slowly. Almost immediately, his breathing became steadier, and the color gradually returned to his face. Relief spread through the room. That is remarkable, one healer whispered. Evelyn simply smiled. Sometimes the body only needs the right kind of help. Standing unnoticed outside the half-open doorway, Magnus watched the entire scene. His attention was not on the recovering courier. It was fixed on Evelyn's wrist, where the sleeve of her sweater had slipped back just enough to reveal a faint silver mark glowing beneath her skin before fading again. His pleasant smile disappeared. Very quietly, so no one else could hear, he murmured, so the bloodline survived after all. By late afternoon, the council chamber had become the center of every important decision in Ashmore. Representatives from 12 allied packs filled the long oak table, while advisors lined the walls with stacks of reports and treaty proposals. Rowan listened in silence as each alpha presented concerns about border disputes, supply routes, and growing unrest among smaller territories. When the final report ended, Elder Miriam slowly rose from her seat. Your Majesty, she began, there is one matter that cannot be delayed any longer. Rowan already knew what was coming. Go ahead. She folded her hands. The kingdom needs certainty. The throne has stood without a Luna for nearly 5 years. Every summit ends with the same unanswered question. Who will stand beside the Alpha King? Quiet agreement spread through the chamber. Magnus leaned back in his chair, saying nothing. He preferred letting others apply pressure before offering his own opinion. Rowan remained calm. A Luna is not chosen to satisfy public expectation. No, Elder Miriam replied. But unity often depends upon symbols. The allied packs are watching. They want stability. Another alpha cleared his throat. Several respected families have already expressed interest in forming a royal bond. Such an alliance would strengthen every treaty discussed in this room. Rowan looked around the table. Would it strengthen the kingdom, or simply the ambitions of a few powerful families? No one answered immediately. Magnus finally spoke, his tone as smooth as polished glass. Perhaps both can be true. Rowan met his gaze. Perhaps. The meeting moved on, but the conversation lingered in everyone's mind. When the council adjourned, Rowan remained alone in the chamber, staring through the tall windows overlooking the castle gardens. His beta commander approached quietly. You handled that well. Rowan gave a faint smile. Did I? You did not promise anything. Rowan rested one hand against the stone window frame. Because I cannot. His commander hesitated before asking. Is this about the herbalist? Rowan did not answer right away. It is about making the right decision for the right reason. Meanwhile, Evelyn spent the afternoon organizing fresh supplies inside the clinic. The young courier she had treated earlier was already sitting up, smiling weakly as he thanked every healer who passed his bed. You saved my trip, he said gratefully. Evelyn shook her head. You did the hard part. Your body wanted to recover. Before he could respond, a royal messenger entered carrying an elegant cream-colored envelope sealed with black wax. Miss Evelyn Hart. She looked up. Yes. A formal invitation from the Royal Council. Every conversation in the room stopped. Evelyn accepted the envelope carefully, her stomach tightening before she even broke the seal. Inside was a simple message. The Royal Council requests your attendance at tomorrow evening's reception honoring distinguished contributors to the Summit of Packs. Formal attire required. Evelyn read the note twice, hoping she had misunderstood it. There must be a mistake, she whispered. The messenger smiled politely. The invitation came directly from the palace. After he left, several healers gathered around her. You should go, one of them said excitedly. No herbalist has ever been invited. Another laughed. Do not worry about fancy clothes. We will help. Evelyn forced a smile, but uneasiness settled deep inside her. The closer she came to the royal family, the more dangerous every step became. That evening, Magnus returned to his private office beneath the West Tower. He opened a locked cabinet and removed an old leather journal covered in dust. Slowly turning the fragile pages, he stopped at a charcoal sketch of the same silver crescent embracing an ash tree. Beneath it, someone had written a single warning many years earlier. If the last heir is ever found, the balance of the throne will change forever. Magnus closed the journal and looked toward the castle lights beyond his window. Then you should never have come back, he said quietly. At that same moment, unaware that her name had become the center of a dangerous conversation, Evelyn stood alone in her small guest room, staring at the royal invitation while the nearly empty bottle of protective herbs rested on the bedside table. She counted the remaining drops one last time. There would not be enough to get through another day. The following evening, Blackstone Keep glowed beneath thousands of warm lights as guests gathered for the royal reception. Music drifted through the open courtyard while representatives from every allied pack exchanged polite greetings that often hid quiet rivalries. Evelyn stood outside the entrance for a long moment before taking a steady breath. The simple midnight blue dress the clinic staff had insisted she borrow fit perfectly, yet she still felt like an outsider walking into a room built for people whose names carried power. You look wonderful, the elderly physician said with a reassuring smile as he joined her. Just remember, you are here because you earned it. Evelyn returned a grateful smile. Thank you for believing that. Together they stepped inside. Across the ballroom, Rowan greeted pack leaders with practiced confidence, but his attention kept wandering through the crowd. Every conversation felt routine. Every formal introduction sounded the same. His wolf remained unusually alert, waiting for something it could not explain. Then the ballroom doors opened. Evelyn entered quietly beside the physician, hoping to disappear into the background as she always had. Instead, several conversations paused. Some guests recognized the herbalist whose remedies had become popular among the royal healers. Others simply wondered why an unknown woman had received an invitation reserved for honored contributors. Rowan noticed her immediately, not because of the dress or because heads turned as she passed. It was the same invisible pull that had followed him since the summit began. Calm on the surface, impossible to ignore underneath. His beta commander leaned closer. You found her before she found you. Rowan answered without taking his eyes off the room. No, I think fate keeps arranging that for us. Before he could cross the ballroom, Elder Miriam approached Evelyn with a welcoming smile. Miss Hart, thank you for accepting our invitation. Evelyn bowed her head politely. It is an honor. The physicians speak very highly of you. We hope you will continue working with the Royal Clinic after the summit. If they still need me, I would be happy to help. The conversation was interrupted when a young server carrying a silver tray lost his balance after another guest accidentally bumped into him. Crystal glasses tipped toward the polished floor. Without thinking, Evelyn reached forward and caught the tray before it crashed. The server looked horrified. I am so sorry. Evelyn smiled warmly. Everyone has a bad moment. You are all right. Several nearby guests quietly applauded the quick save, and the embarrassed young man relaxed enough to laugh. Rowan watched the exchange from across the room. Most people revealed who they truly were when something unexpected happened. Evelyn had chosen kindness before anyone asked for it. That mattered more to him than perfect manners or famous family names. As the musicians began another song, Rowan finally walked toward her. Guests respectfully stepped aside. Conversations softened. Evelyn looked up and found the Alpha King standing only a few feet away. Miss Hart, Rowan said, his tone calm as always. I hope the evening has been welcoming. Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone has been very generous. Would you join me for a walk in the East Garden? It is quieter than this room. Evelyn hesitated for only a second before answering. Of course. They crossed the terrace together beneath strings of glowing lanterns. The night air carried the scent of blooming jasmine and fresh cedar from the surrounding hills. For the first time in days, the crowd disappeared behind them. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Rowan glanced toward the moon rising above the castle walls. You always seem more relaxed outside. Evelyn laughed softly. Nature asks fewer questions than people do. Rowan smiled. That may be true. Before either could continue, a cool gust swept through the garden. Evelyn instinctively reached into the small purse she carried, searching for the herbal bottle that had always protected her secret. Her fingers found only empty glass. The final drop had been used that morning. She froze. Almost instantly, Rowan felt something shift deep within him. The faint fragrance that had haunted his memories returned with startling clarity, stronger than ever before. His wolf surged forward, not with rage, but with unmistakable recognition. Rowan drew one slow breath, deliberately steadying himself before taking another step back instead of closer. He met Evelyn's frightened eyes and spoke so quietly that only she could hear. Do not be afraid. I am not going to let my instincts decide who you are. But I need you to tell me why my wolf has been searching for you. Evelyn could hear the music from the reception drifting across the gardens, but it sounded impossibly far away. The only thing she could focus on was Rowan standing a respectful distance from her, giving her space even though every instinct inside him had to be demanding answers. She had spent years preparing for the day someone discovered her secret. Somehow, she had never imagined the Alpha King would be the one to find it. She swallowed slowly. I wish I could explain everything. Rowan kept his voice even. Then start with what you can. She looked down at the empty glass bottle, still resting in her hand. The herbs did not stop working because they were weak. They stopped working because I ran out. Rowan glanced at the bottle before looking back at her. You have been hiding your scent. She nodded once. Since I was 16. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Rowan asked the question that mattered most. From whom? Evelyn gave a sad smile. Everyone. The answer settled heavily between them. Rowan had expected enemies, rival packs, perhaps even someone inside the palace. He had not expected a woman who sounded exhausted by years of pretending to be invisible. Why? He asked quietly. Evelyn rested both hands on the stone railing overlooking the moonlit gardens. Because my grandmother believed that if anyone learned who I was, people would stop seeing me as a person. They would only see what my blood could do for them. Rowan listened without interruption. She told me powerful wolves would fight over an old name that I never even understood. She took a slow breath. So we moved. Again and again. New towns. New jobs. New stories. We never stayed anywhere long enough to belong. Rowan recognized something in her words that felt painfully familiar. His own life had been filled with expectations instead of choices. Different roads had led them to the same loneliness. Your grandmother loved you, he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. She did. Everything she did was meant to protect me. Rowan nodded. That does not mean she knew the future. Evelyn looked at him carefully. You are taking this better than I expected. A quiet laugh escaped him. Most people think being Alpha King means knowing exactly what to do. Do not tell me that is not true. It is not. He leaned lightly against the railing beside her. Most days it means making the best decision with half the truth. She studied him for a moment before asking, and what do you think the truth is tonight? Rowan answered without hesitation. I think someone has spent years carrying a burden alone. The words caught her off guard. She had expected suspicion, questions, demands. Instead, she found understanding. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps crossed the garden path. Rowan's beta commander approached, lowering his voice. Your Majesty, there is a problem. Rowan immediately straightened. What happened? Someone delivered anonymous letters to several council members. He handed Rowan a folded page. Rowan opened it and read the first line. Beware the woman hiding among us. She carries the forgotten bloodline that nearly destroyed the kingdom once before. Rowan's expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. Who received these? At least 6 elders. Possibly more. Evelyn felt the color leave her face. They know. Rowan folded the paper once and slipped it into his jacket. No, he corrected gently. Someone wants them to believe they know. She shook her head. It does not matter. Rumors spread faster than truth. Rowan looked directly at her. Only if good people stay silent. She searched his face, trying to decide whether she could trust him. Everything her grandmother had taught her warned against it. Yet nothing about the man standing beside her matched the stories she had feared all her life. Before either of them could speak again, a palace guard hurried into the garden. Your Majesty, he called. Beta Regent Magnus requests an emergency meeting of the Royal Council. He says it concerns the future of the throne. Rowan exchanged one brief look with Evelyn. Neither of them knew exactly what Magnus had discovered, but they both understood one thing. The quiet days of hiding were over. The royal council chamber felt colder than it had only an hour earlier. The celebration outside continued with music and laughter, but behind the carved oak doors every seat was filled, every expression guarded. Rowan took his place at the head of the table without ceremony. Magnus Blackthorne stood near the center of the room, a collection of folded letters resting neatly before him. "You requested an emergency session," Rowan said. "You have the floor." Magnus inclined his head. "Your Majesty, several council members received anonymous warnings tonight. Under normal circumstances, I would dismiss such claims. Unfortunately, recent events suggest they deserve careful consideration." Elder Miriam frowned. "Anonymous accusations have never been the foundation of Ashmore justice." "Agreed," Magnus replied smoothly. "Which is why I am asking questions, not delivering judgment." He lifted one of the letters. "The writer claims that someone carrying a forgotten royal bloodline is living inside Blackstone Keep under a false identity." Quiet murmurs spread around the chamber. Rowan remained still. "And your evidence?" Magnus answered with measured confidence. "Only unusual observations. A healer with no registered pack. An ancient crest connected to erased history. Reports from witnesses describing unexplained marks." He paused before adding, "Enough to justify concern." Rowan looked around the table. "Concern is not proof." Magnus nodded politely. "No, but ignoring possible threats has never protected a kingdom either." Before the discussion could grow louder, another council member spoke. "If there truly is a surviving heir from the old bloodline, every allied pack deserves transparency." Rowan answered immediately. "Every citizen deserves fairness first." The room fell silent again. His words carried the weight of law. After a long pause, Elder Miriam turned toward the king. "Your Majesty, are you withholding information from this council?" Rowan did not rush his answer. "I met Miss Evelyn Hart earlier today. I found no evidence that she has committed any crime, threatened this kingdom, or acted dishonorably." Magnus folded his hands. "You did not answer the question." Rowan met his eyes without flinching. Because it was the wrong question. Across the castle, Evelyn sat alone in the small library beside the royal clinic. She had no desire to return to the reception, while whispers followed her through every hallway. The old physician quietly entered carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. He placed one beside her without speaking. After a moment, he smiled gently. "People become afraid when they cannot explain something." Evelyn stared into the steam rising from the cup. "I never wanted to be important." "Perhaps you are not important because of your blood," he replied. "Perhaps you are important because of the choices you keep making." She looked at him with tired eyes. "Do you believe the rumors?" The physician answered without hesitation. "I believe the woman who stayed awake through the night caring for strangers. That tells me far more than gossip ever could." His words settled deeply inside her. She had spent years expecting people to fear her before they even knew her name. It felt almost unfamiliar to be trusted. Meanwhile, outside the council chamber, Rowan's beta commander intercepted him before he could leave. "Your Majesty, security reports are coming in." Rowan accepted the file. "Anything unusual?" "Several Allied Pact delegates are demanding a private vote tomorrow morning. Some believe the rumors. Others think someone inside the palace is manipulating the summit." Rowan closed the folder. "And what do you believe?" The commander did not hesitate. "I believe someone wants the packs fighting each other instead of asking who benefits from the chaos." Rowan nodded once. "Find the source of the letters." Quietly, as the commander disappeared down the corridor, Rowan noticed a young palace servant hurrying away with an empty basket. One folded envelope slipped unnoticed onto the stone floor. Rowan picked it up. Unlike the others, this one was not addressed to a council elder. It bore a single name written in careful black ink. Evelyn Hart. Inside was only one sentence. "If you want the truth about your grandmother, come alone to the abandoned ash grove before sunrise." Rowan read the letter twice before folding it carefully and slipping it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Whoever had written it knew exactly where to strike. Evelyn had spent her entire life searching for answers about her grandmother, and this promise would be almost impossible for her to ignore. He looked toward the dark hallway leading to the guest quarters. "You are trying to separate her from everyone who can protect her," he said quietly. His beta commander returned a few minutes later with another update. We questioned the palace servants. No one remembers who delivered the envelope. It was left in a basket with the evening correspondence. Rowan nodded thoughtfully. That means the sender wanted us to find it eventually. Should we destroy it? Rowan shook his head. No. If Evelyn receives another invitation, she deserves to know about it from me, not from rumors. Before sunrise, the castle was unusually quiet. A thin layer of morning mist settled over the gardens, while most guests still slept after the reception. Evelyn stood beside her window, unable to rest. The whispers she had overheard the night before echoed through her mind. Forgotten bloodline. Hidden heir. Threat to the throne. She wrapped her sweater around herself and stared toward the distant hills beyond Blackstone Keep. Every instinct told her to leave before the summit became even more dangerous. She had disappeared before. She could disappear again. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Hart. It was the elderly physician. She opened the door. He held out a small basket filled with fresh herbs. I thought you might need these. The gardeners harvested them before sunrise. Evelyn recognized the familiar leaves immediately, the same rare plants her grandmother had always used. She looked up in surprise. These do not grow naturally here. Apparently they do now. The physician replied with a smile. The royal gardeners planted them years ago at the king's request after he noticed they helped recovering patients. Evelyn ran her fingers gently across the leaves. He did that. His Majesty believes healing deserves investment. The old physician hesitated before adding, Kings are often judged by battles. I think they should also be judged by what they choose to protect. After he left, Evelyn carefully prepared a fresh herbal mixture. The familiar scent filled the room, but something felt different. The new batch softened the edges of her hidden scent without completely masking it. She frowned. The herbs were no longer enough. Deep inside, she knew why. Some secrets could only stay buried for so long. Later that morning, Rowan invited Evelyn to meet him in the castle archives instead of the council chamber. The enormous room smelled of old paper, polished oak, and centuries of history. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, holding records from every generation of Ashmore. Rowan waited beside a long wooden table where several ancient books already lay open. Thank you for coming, he said. Evelyn looked around nervously. Am I in trouble? No. Rowan motioned toward the books. I think both of us have been missing pieces of the same story. He carefully unfolded the aged parchment she had dropped in the garden and placed it beside a dusty royal record. The two silver crests matched perfectly. Evelyn stared in disbelief. Rowan turned another page, revealing an old portrait of a smiling woman standing beneath an ash tree. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same thoughtful eyes. The same gentle smile. Evelyn whispered, That is my grandmother. Rowan nodded slowly. Her name was Eleanor Hart. Evelyn blinked in surprise. You know her name? Until yesterday, I did not. Rowan slid a weathered journal across the table. These records were sealed 15 years ago by order of the crown. I had them opened this morning. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for the journal. The first page contained a sentence written by Rowan's late father in careful handwriting. The ash tree bloodline was never a threat. They were made into one. Evelyn looked up, her eyes filled with confusion. Then everything I was told. Rowan finished the thought quietly. May have been built on a lie. Neither of them noticed the narrow gap between the archive doors. Standing just outside, hidden from view, Magnus listened in complete silence. A slow smile crossed his face as he realized the truth was finally leading Rowan exactly where he wanted him to go. The silence inside the royal archives lingered long after Rowan closed the weathered journal. Evelyn remained frozen beside the table, unable to pull her eyes away from the familiar face in the old portrait. She had spent years believing her grandmother had been nothing more than a traveling healer who feared powerful packs. Now every memory seemed to carry a different meaning. Why would the crown seal this? She asked quietly. Rowan rested one hand on the edge of the table. I have been asking myself the same question. He opened another leather-bound record, its pages marked with the royal seal of his late father. Most of these documents were classified before I became king. I was told they contained information that could divide the allied packs if released. Evelyn looked at him. Do you believe that? Rowan answered honestly. I believe someone wanted future kings to stop asking questions. Before either of them could continue, Rowan's beta commander entered the archives carrying another folder. His expression alone told Rowan the situation had become worse. Your Majesty, delegates from 4 northern packs have requested an emergency assembly this evening. They are demanding a public explanation regarding the rumors. Rowan accepted the folder without opening it. Who organized the request? Officially, no one. Unofficially, every trail leads back to Magnus. Rowan nodded slowly. As I expected. The commander hesitated before glancing toward Evelyn. There is something else. He lowered his voice. Several delegates have already begun saying the throne cannot remain stable if there is uncertainty surrounding forgotten bloodlines. Evelyn looked down at the floor. I never wanted any of this. Rowan stepped closer, careful to leave enough space that she would never feel trapped. I know. She shook her head. No, I do not think you do. Everywhere my grandmother and I went, we left before people could ask too many questions. We never stayed long enough to have friends. We never celebrated birthdays with neighbors. We never belonged anywhere because she believed one day someone would come looking for me. Her voice softened. Maybe she was right. Rowan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he spoke with quiet certainty. Running kept you alive. It does not have to define the rest of your life. Evelyn searched his face, surprised by how calm he remained despite everything happening around them. Why are you helping me? Rowan smiled faintly. Because every piece of evidence I have found tells me you have spent your life protecting others instead of yourself. That matters more to me than old rumors. Before she could answer, a palace attendant hurried into the room. Your Majesty, the council has voted to move tonight's closing ceremony from the ballroom to the Grand Assembly Court. Representatives from every pack have been invited. Rowan understood exactly what that meant. A public gathering. A larger audience. A perfect stage for Magnus. After the attendant left, Rowan turned back toward the shelves and reached for one final document hidden inside a locked cabinet. The key had belonged to his father. The seal cracked with a quiet snap as he unfolded the parchment. Across the top were the words Royal Accord of Ash Tree Hollow. Beneath them appeared dozens of signatures from alpha leaders who had lived a generation earlier. Rowan's eyes stopped at the final paragraph. He read it once, then again more slowly. His expression changed. Evelyn noticed immediately. What is it? Rowan handed her the document. Read the last page. She scanned the faded handwriting until one sentence made her breath catch. The Ash Tree bloodline shall never be claimed by force, commanded by the throne, or bound against free choice, for their gift was entrusted to unite the packs, not to rule them. Evelyn lowered the paper. Then everything people believe about my family is wrong. Rowan nodded. Not everything. She looked up. What do you mean? Rowan met her eyes. Someone erased the truth because the truth threatened their power. At that exact moment, the great bell of Blackstone Keep echoed across the capital, announcing the beginning of the emergency assembly. Outside, hundreds of delegates were already gathering beneath the open sky, unaware that before the night was over, the future of every pack would depend on whether the truth could finally be spoken aloud. The Grand Assembly Court was filled long before the royal bell stopped ringing. Leaders from every allied pack stood beneath rows of banners that swayed gently in the evening breeze, while citizens gathered behind the stone terraces, waiting for answers. The atmosphere felt nothing like the celebration that had been planned only a day before. Quiet conversations carried the same questions from one corner of the courtyard to another. Rowan stepped onto the raised platform wearing the ceremonial cloak of the Alpha King, but tonight the weight on his shoulders came from more than tradition. Beside the council seats, Magnus stood with his hands folded, watching the crowd with patient confidence. He looked less like a man preparing for a debate and more like someone waiting for a carefully arranged plan to unfold. Elder Miriam struck the ceremonial staff against the stone floor. This emergency assembly is now in session. Magnus was the first to speak. My fellow leaders, none of us wanted this gathering. Yet uncertainty spreads faster than truth, and our people deserve clarity. Several heads nodded. Magnus continued with measured calm. For days we have heard reports of a hidden bloodline living inside Blackstone Keep. We have seen unusual events, ancient symbols, unexplained markings, questions that remain unanswered. He turned toward Rowan. Your Majesty, will you deny that you have privately investigated these claims? Rowan answered without hesitation. No, I investigated because a responsible king seeks facts before reaching conclusions. Magnus gave a polite smile. Then perhaps you will share those facts with everyone. Before Rowan could respond, another alpha leader stood. If there truly is a surviving heir connected to forgotten history, every pack deserves to know. A second voice joined in. Secrets create fear. Then another. The council cannot lead through silence. Rowan listened without interrupting. When the voices finally settled, he stepped forward. You are right about one thing. Secrets do create fear. His gaze swept across the assembly. But fear also grows when rumors are treated as evidence. Magnus tilted his head slightly. Then present the evidence. Rowan reached inside his coat. But before he could remove the recovered documents, a palace guard hurried toward the platform carrying another sealed report. The guard bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, this arrived moments ago. Rowan broke the seal. His expression changed almost instantly. His beta commander quietly stepped beside him. What happened? Rowan handed him the letter. The commander read only a few lines before looking toward the crowd with concern. The message claimed that Evelyn had already fled the castle before the assembly began, calling her disappearance proof of guilt. A wave of whispers spread through the audience as copies of the same accusation somehow appeared among several delegates. Rowan immediately understood what had happened. Someone had prepared this in advance. Magnus remained perfectly composed. If the accusations are false, he said evenly, surely Miss Hart will appear before us herself. Rowan looked toward the entrance of the assembly court. Evelyn was nowhere to be seen. At that very moment, Evelyn stood alone in the quiet chapel near the Western Gardens, unaware that the meeting had already begun. She had come searching for a moment of peace after reading the final pages of the Royal Accord. Instead, she found an elderly groundskeeper waiting beside a stained glass window. He slowly turned as she entered. Your grandmother used to come here, he said gently. Evelyn stopped in surprise. You knew her? The old man smiled with quiet sadness. She asked me to promise something many years ago. If her granddaughter ever returned, I was to give her this. He placed a small wooden box into Evelyn's hands. Inside rested a simple silver pendant shaped like an ash leaf and a folded letter written in Eleanor Hart's unmistakable handwriting. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes before she even opened it. The first sentence was enough to make her heart ache. If you are reading this, it means hiding is no longer protecting you. At the same moment, back in the assembly court, Elder Miriam slowly rose from her seat before anyone else could speak. Her voice carried clearly across the silent courtyard. Before this council judges one innocent woman, there is something about our own history that I can no longer keep buried. The entire assembly court fell silent as Elder Miriam stepped away from her seat and faced the gathered packs instead of the royal platform. Her voice was steady, but years of regret could be heard beneath every word. For too long, we have protected our pride instead of our history. She turned slowly toward Rowan before looking back at the crowd. Many of you believe the ash tree bloodline nearly divided this kingdom. That is not what happened. Quiet murmurs spread through the audience. Magnus remained perfectly still, although the confidence in his expression began to fade. Elder Miriam continued. A generation ago, the ash tree family refused to let their gift become a political weapon. They believed that no alpha, no council, and not even the crown should force a mate bond or use bloodlines to control alliances. Some powerful leaders feared losing influence, so they rewrote the story. She paused, allowing the truth to settle over the courtyard. We did not erase a dangerous family. We erased an honorable one. Rowan stepped forward holding the recovered journals and the royal accord high enough for every council member to see. These documents were sealed by my father's administration after advisors convinced him they would preserve peace. Instead, they buried the truth. He opened the journal to the signed testimony of former pack leaders. Tonight those records become public. Palace attendants carried copies through the assembly while leaders read the faded pages for themselves. One by one, expressions of certainty turned into quiet disbelief. An older alpha from the Western Territories lowered the papers with trembling hands. My grandfather signed this. Another elder whispered. We have been repeating a lie for 15 years. Magnus finally broke the silence. Old documents do not erase present danger. Rowan looked directly at him. Then show us the danger. Magnus opened his mouth, but no answer came. Facts had replaced rumors, and the rumors suddenly sounded empty. At that moment, the great doors at the rear of the assembly court opened. Every head turned. Evelyn walked inside wearing the simple blue dress from the reception, the silver ash leaf pendant now resting openly around her neck. She moved through the crowd without rushing, meeting the eyes of strangers who only hours earlier had spoken about her as though she were a story instead of a person. When she reached the front of the court, she stopped beside Rowan but did not hide behind him. Rowan glanced toward her, silently asking if she was certain. She gave one small nod. Then she faced the gathered packs herself. My grandmother spent her life teaching me to heal people because she believed kindness outlived fear. Her voice carried across the courtyard with quiet strength. She never told me to seek a throne. She never told me to claim power. She only asked me to protect my freedom to choose my own life. She held up the handwritten letter Eleanor had left behind. Everything I have learned tells me she trusted this kingdom to become better than it once was. The assembly remained silent. No one interrupted her. Rowan stepped beside her, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. Hear me clearly. No one will command Evelyn Hart's future. Not this council. Not this throne. Not even me. His words echoed across the stone courtyard. A mate bond is not ownership. A crown does not give me the right to decide another person's life. If I am worthy to remain your alpha king, then I must honor the laws our ancestors originally intended, not the fears that replaced them. Elder Miriam lowered her head in agreement. Several alpha leaders followed. Then another. Soon the gesture spread across the assembly, not as surrender, but as acknowledgement that something long broken had finally begun to heal. Rowan looked toward Evelyn one last time. There was no expectation in his eyes, only respect. After a quiet breath, Evelyn closed the remaining distance between them of her own free will. She reached for his hand, and as their fingers met beneath the light of the rising moon, the faint silver mark on her wrist appeared once more, answered by a matching glow beneath Rowan's sleeve. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The bond revealed itself not through force, but through a choice freely made. While across the assembly court the first rays of hope replaced the fear that had ruled the kingdom for far too long. 6 months later, the first snow of winter settled gently across Blackstone Keep, softening the stone towers that had once witnessed fear, suspicion, and silence. The kingdom looked different now, not because the walls had changed, but because the people inside them had. The sealed records had been opened to every allied pack. The forgotten history of the Ash Tree bloodline was taught beside the victories of former kings instead of hidden beneath locked doors. The Royal Council had adopted new laws protecting every wolf's freedom to accept or refuse a mate bond without political pressure, restoring the promise written by those who had come before them. Rowan had insisted that the reforms carry the signatures of every alpha leader willing to stand behind them. If trust is going to return, he had said during the final council meeting, it cannot belong to one king. It has to belong to all of us. Not everyone agreed at first. Change rarely arrived without resistance. Yet week after week, more packs chose cooperation over old rivalries, discovering that honesty built stronger alliances than fear ever could. Magnus Blackthorn no longer held influence within the council. When the evidence revealed how rumors had been carefully planted to divide the kingdom for personal ambition, he was removed from public office through the lawful judgment of the council he had once tried to control. Rowan refused to celebrate his downfall. Justice should never become revenge, he quietly told his advisors. Otherwise we repeat the same mistakes. Evelyn returned to the royal clinic, exactly where she wanted to be. She could have accepted titles, private estates, or positions that placed her above everyone else, but she chose something simpler. Every morning, she walked through the same doors carrying baskets of fresh herbs, greeting patients by name before they recognized who she had become. Children from every pack waited excitedly for her weekly lessons in the castle gardens, where she taught them how to identify healing plants instead of teaching them which bloodlines deserved respect. One afternoon, a young Omega girl nervously asked, "Miss Hart, were you ever afraid?" Evelyn smiled as she knelt beside her. "Every day." The little girl looked confused. "Then how did you keep going?" Evelyn gently placed a tiny ash seed into the child's hand. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Sometimes courage is simply deciding that fear will not choose your future. Rowan had been standing a short distance away, pretending to inspect the newly planted trees. He smiled to himself, knowing she had just taught a lesson no royal decree could ever replace. Later that evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the mountains, Rowan found Evelyn walking through the restored ash grove, where young trees now stretched toward the winter sky. The abandoned place she had once been warned never to visit had become a public sanctuary dedicated to remembrance instead of secrecy. He joined her without saying anything. After a comfortable silence, Evelyn looked up at the branches. "Do you think my grandmother would have liked this?" Rowan followed her gaze. "I think she spent her whole life hoping for it." Evelyn rested one hand against the rough bark of the tallest ash tree. "She believed hiding would keep me safe." Rowan answered softly. "She protected the future the only way she knew how. You honored her by building a better one." She reached for his hand, not because destiny demanded it, but because it felt like home. There was no ceremony, no audience, no council watching. Just two people who had learned that love meant protecting another person's freedom instead of claiming it. A cold breeze carried the scent of cedar, rain, and fresh earth through the grove. This time, neither of them tried to hide it. Across the kingdom, life continued as it always would. Wolves still argued. Leaders still faced impossible choices. New challenges waited beyond every season. But one story had quietly changed the course of many others. Years later, elders would tell young pups that the strongest alpha king in Ashmore history was remembered not because he ruled with the loudest voice, but because he listened before he judged. They would remember the quiet healer who proved that kindness could survive generations of fear without losing its strength. And whenever someone asked how an old kingdom finally found peace, the answer was never about a throne, an ancient bloodline, or even a mate bond. It was about two people who chose truth over fear, compassion over pride, and hope over the stories that had once tried to define them. Because the greatest legacy any generation leaves behind is not the power it holds, but the courage it gives to the next one.